Do you like it from behind? Asked the 20-year-old woman to the lonely Apache woman. Known only by surface things, her face, her silence, her background, but invisible in ways that mattered. Her mornings always began before the sun climbed high. She liked the early hours because the world felt honest then. No noise, no staring eyes, no questions. She made her tea carefully, the same way every day, and sat by the window that faced the dirt road. From there she watched dust rise when a truck passed and settle again as if nothing had happened. Life felt much the same to her, brief movement then quiet. People in town called her strong, though they never asked what strength had cost her. They said she was reserved, proud, distant. Few knew that silence had become her shield long ago. When words are often twisted, silence feels safer. That afternoon was warmer than usual. The air felt heavy as if the sky itself was holding its breath. She had gone into town to buy supplies, something she did only when necessary. The small store was busy, louder than she liked, filled with voices that blended into one restless sound. She kept her eyes down, moved quickly, and waited her turn. That was when the young woman appeared beside her. She was about 20, maybe younger in the way she carried herself. Bold, careless, full of energy that had not yet learned restraint. Her laughter was loud, not cruel, but careless. She spoke easily to the cashier, to strangers, to anyone nearby. She noticed the Apache woman standing quietly and smiled, as if curiosity had found a new place to land. At first, the older woman thought nothing of it. She was used to looks, used to interest that had little to do with her as a person. But then the young woman spoke, leaning in slightly, lowering her voice in a way that felt too familiar for strangers. The question came suddenly, personal, unfiltered, spoken as if it were harmless, as if words did not carry history or weight. For a moment the world seemed to stop. The Apache woman did not react right away. She did not raise her voice. She did not show anger. She simply stood there, holding the small basket in her hands, feeling the echo of the question move through her chest. It was not the first time someone had crossed a line, but it was the suddenness that struck her, the ease with which the young woman assumed she could ask such a thing. Around them the store continued as normal. Someone laughed. The register beeped. A door opened and closed. No one else seemed to notice. Inside her something shifted. She remembered other moments like this, scattered across her life like small stones in a long road. Questions asked without care. Comments made without thought. People seeing only what they wanted to see. Her culture turned into a story others thought they already understood. Her loneliness mistaken for invitation. Her quiet taken as permission. She looked at the young woman then, really looked. The girl's expression was open, curious, almost playful. Not cruel, not mocking, just unaware. That awareness changed everything. The Apache woman felt the familiar urge to disappear, to step back into silence and let the moment pass. That had always been easier. Silence never demanded explanations. Silence never exposed old wounds. But this time she stayed. She asked herself why the question bothered her so deeply. It was not only about the words. It was about how easily people believed they could reach into her life without knocking. How often her identity became something others felt free to explore without respect. She did not answer right away. The pause stretched, and the young woman's smile faded slightly, replaced by uncertainty. Perhaps she sensed too late that something had gone wrong. The Apache woman spoke calmly, her voice low but steady. She did not scold. She did not accuse. She simply asked, "Why would you ask me that?" She muttered something about curiosity, about not meaning harm, about just talking. But the moment had already changed. The Apache woman paid for her items and walked outside, feeling the sun hit her face. She breathed deeply, grounding herself in the heat, the smell of dust, the open sky. The question followed her not as an insult but as a reminder of how alone she often felt even among people. Loneliness is not always about being alone. Sometimes it comes from being unseen. As she walked home, memories surfaced without warning. Long drives through desert roads. Evenings spent listening to elders speak of respect, of listening before speaking. She wondered what those elders would say about the world now, where words were thrown carelessly and meaning was rarely considered. Back in her home, she set the supplies down and sat once more by the window. The dirt road was empty again. Stillness returned, but something inside her had shifted. She felt tired but also awake. She thought of the young woman, not with anger but with a quiet sadness. How many times had she spoken without understanding? How many times would she learn only after causing harm? The Apache woman knew she could not change the world in one moment, but she also knew that moments like these mattered. They revealed the distance between people, and sometimes, if handled carefully, they offered a chance to close that distance. As the sun lowered and shadows grew long, she made herself another cup of tea. The warmth steadied her. She reminded herself that her story was more than a question asked by a stranger. Her life held depth, history, resilience. No careless words could erase that. Still, the question lingered, not as an insult but as a turning point. A reminder that silence, while safe, also allowed misunderstanding to grow unchecked. For the first time in a long while, she wondered what might happen if she spoke more, if she chose not just to endure moments like these, but to reshape them. Outside, the sky turned gold and then deep blue. The day ended, but something new had begun quietly within her, a readiness perhaps to be seen on her own terms. The days after that afternoon moved slowly, as if time itself was unsure how to proceed. The Apache woman returned to her routines, but the routines no longer felt as steady as before. Each small task carried a quiet echo of the moment in the store. Not the words themselves, but what they revealed. The gap between how she saw herself and how others often saw her had grown clearer, sharper. She woke early again before the birds, before the heat rose from the ground. She swept the floor, washed her cup, folded the blanket at the foot of her bed. These actions had always brought comfort. They were familiar, predictable, and safe. But now her thoughts wandered while her hands worked. She thought about how misunderstandings are born, rarely from bad intentions, she believed, but from distance. Distance between cultures, distance between generations, distance between what is lived and what is assumed. When she was young, elders had taught her to listen more than she spoke. Words, they said, should be carried with care, like water in open hands. Spilled words could not be gathered again. She had lived by that lesson for most of her life. Silence became her language of respect, but silence, she had learned, also invited others to speak for her. As the sun climbed higher, she stepped outside and sat on the low wooden chair near her door. The land stretched wide in front of her, calm and unbothered by human confusion. The earth did not explain itself. It simply existed. She found comfort in that. Her mind drifted backward to earlier years when she first noticed how people looked at her differently. In school, teachers often spoke slowly to her, even when she understood perfectly. Strangers asked questions about her background as if it were a story meant for their entertainment. Some admired her culture in words but ignored it in action. Over time, she learned to shrink herself, just enough to avoid attention. She answered politely, briefly. She avoided eye contact. She let assumptions pass without correction. It felt easier than carrying the weight of explaining herself again and again. Loneliness grew quietly in that space, not the loud kind that comes from being abandoned, but the soft kind that comes from being surrounded, yet untouched. She attended gatherings where people smiled but did not truly see her. She worked alongside others who knew her name but not her life. Slowly she accepted that this was how things were, until the question in the store disturbed that acceptance. She wondered about the young woman often now, not with anger but with curiosity. What kind of world had shaped her to speak so freely, without pause? Perhaps she had never been taught to consider the weight of her words. Perhaps no one had ever corrected her before. The Apache woman realized something uncomfortable. She had also played a role in the misunderstanding. By staying silent for so long, she had allowed others to fill the quiet with their own ideas. Silence had protected her, but it had also erased her voice. That thought unsettled her. In the evenings, she walked along the dirt road as the air cooled. Walking helped her think. Each step grounded her, reminded her that she belonged to this land regardless of how others saw her. The road held memories, childhood laughter, long walks with relatives who were gone now, stories shared under wide skies. She remembered her grandmother's voice, calm and firm, telling her that dignity did not require silence. That respect could be gentle, but it could also be clear. At the time, she had not fully understood. Now the memory returned with new meaning. One evening, as she sat watching the sun fade, she noticed movement down the road. A familiar figure approached slowly, uncertainly. It was the young woman from the store. The Apache woman did not stand up. She did not wave. She simply watched. The young woman stopped a few steps away, shifting nervously. The confidence she had shown before was gone. Her voice, when she spoke, was softer, careful. She said she had been thinking about what happened. She said she felt embarrassed. She said she did not know why she had spoken the way she did, only that she now realized it had been wrong. The Apache woman listened without interrupting. Listening, after all, was something she knew well. The young woman continued, explaining that she had grown up in a place where people joked freely, where lines were often crossed and laughed away. She had never meant to hurt anyone. She admitted she had never met someone like the Apache woman before, never learned about her life beyond what she had seen in movies or online. Those words stung, but they were honest. The Apache woman finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was strength in it. She explained how words could feel different depending on who carried them and who received them. She spoke of how often people assumed things about her without asking who she truly was. She spoke of how tiring it was to be reduced to an idea instead of a person. The young woman listened now, truly listened. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself. She simply stood there, absorbing each word. In that moment, something shifted between them. The Apache woman realized that this conversation, uncomfortable as it was, mattered. It was not about blame. It was about understanding. For the first time in a long while, she felt heard. The young woman apologized again, not quickly, not casually, but with care. She thanked the Apache woman for explaining instead of walking away. When the young woman left, the road returned to quiet. But the quiet felt different now. It was not heavy. It was thoughtful. That night, the Apache woman slept deeply. Her dreams were filled with voices from her past, guiding rather than warning. She woke with a sense of clarity she had not felt in years. She understood now that misunderstanding thrived in silence, but understanding required courage. Speaking did not mean losing dignity. It meant claiming it. The next morning, she brewed her tea and sat by the window once more. The dirt road was empty, but she no longer felt invisible. Her story still belonged to her. And now she was ready to let it be known, carefully, truthfully, and on her own terms. What had begun as a careless question had opened a door she did not know she needed to open, not toward conflict but toward connection. And though the path ahead was uncertain, she felt steady enough to walk it. The days that followed the conversation by the road felt different, though nothing around her had changed. The same sky stretched above her home. The same dirt road waited quietly each morning. Yet inside her, something had loosened, as if a tight knot she had carried for years had finally begun to ease. She noticed it in small ways. When she went into town, she lifted her head instead of keeping her eyes down. When the cashier greeted her, she returned the greeting with more than a nod. These were small actions, almost unnoticeable to others, but to her they felt like steps taken after a long pause. She kept thinking about the young woman, not the mistake she had made, but the effort she had shown afterward. It was rare, she realized, for someone so young to return and listen instead of disappearing into comfort. That mattered. One afternoon, while buying supplies again, she saw the young woman at the far end of the store. This time, the girl hesitated before approaching. There was respect in that pause, a quiet question without words. The Apache woman noticed and nodded gently, an invitation that surprised them both. They spoke briefly at first. Simple things, the weather, the long lines. The way the town never seemed to change. The conversation felt careful but real. No hidden meanings, no careless words. As days passed, these small conversations continued. Sometimes in the store, sometimes along the road. They did not meet often, but when they did, there was an ease that had not been there before. The young woman asked questions now, but they were different. She asked about daily life, about work, about what it was like to grow up where the Apache woman had grown up. She listened closely to the answers. The Apache woman chose her words with care, not out of fear, but out of respect for her own story. She did not explain everything. She did not open every door, but she shared enough to let herself be known. In return, the young woman shared pieces of her own life. She spoke about growing up restless, always wanting to move, always wanting to be seen. She admitted that she often spoke before thinking because silence made her uncomfortable. Silence, to her, felt like rejection. Hearing this, the Apache woman felt a quiet understanding settle between them. They were different in many ways, shaped by different worlds, but both carried loneliness in forms that others rarely noticed. One evening, the young woman asked if she could sit for a while. They sat outside, watching the sky change colors as the sun lowered. The air was cooler, softer. Neither rushed to speak. The Apache woman realized something important then. Silence did not have to mean distance. It could also mean trust. She began to tell stories. Not lessons, not explanations, but memories. Walking with her grandmother at dawn. Learning which plants could heal and which should be left untouched. Hearing songs that carried history in their rhythm. She spoke slowly, letting each memory settle before moving to the next. The young woman listened, fully present. She did not interrupt. She did not compare. She simply received the stories as gifts. For the Apache woman, speaking like this felt unfamiliar but freeing. She was not defending herself. She was not correcting misunderstandings. She was simply sharing who she was. As weeks passed, word spread quietly through the town, not as gossip but as recognition. People noticed her more, not as a symbol, not as a mystery, but as a neighbor. Some greeted her with genuine warmth. Others asked thoughtful questions. Not everyone understood, but fewer assumed. She knew change was slow. Deep habits did not disappear overnight, but she also knew that change had begun, and that was enough. One afternoon, a community meeting was announced. Normally, she would have avoided such gatherings. Too many voices, too much noise, but this time she went. She sat near the back at first, listening. People spoke about town concerns, small problems, shared hopes. When there was a pause, she felt her heart beat faster. The old instinct told her to stay quiet, to let others speak for her. Instead, she raised her hand. Her voice was steady when she spoke. She shared a simple idea, rooted in respect and listening. She spoke about how people could learn from one another if they slowed down and paid attention. She did not accuse. She did not lecture. She spoke from experience. The room grew quiet, people listened. Afterward, several approached her. Some thanked her, some asked questions, some simply nodded as if recognizing something they had not named before. The young woman stood nearby, watching with a small smile. Pride, perhaps, or gratitude. Walking home that evening, the Apache woman felt tired, but in a good way. Like someone who had carried a heavy load and finally set it down. She understood now that connection was not about being loud or silent. It was about being honest, about choosing when to speak and when to listen, not out of fear, but out of purpose. The question that had once unsettled her no longer held power over her. It had become something else entirely, a doorway to understanding, to conversation, to growth. As she reached her home and looked out at the land she loved, she felt grounded, seen, whole. She knew challenges would come again. Misunderstandings would return in new forms. But she also knew she no longer had to face them alone or in silence. She had found her voice, not to shout, not to explain herself endlessly, but to exist fully and openly. And that, she realized, was enough. The change did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like light moving across the land at sunrise. Some days felt strong and clear. Other days felt uncertain. But the Apache woman no longer felt stuck in the same quiet place she had lived in for so long. She continued her routines, but they no longer felt like walls. They felt like roots. Each morning she still rose early. She still made her tea and sat by the window. The dirt road was the same, but her thoughts were not. She no longer watched the world pass by as if she were outside of it. She felt part of it now, even when she was alone. People in town had begun to greet her differently. Not with curiosity or caution, but with familiarity. Some asked how she was doing and waited for an answer. Others spoke to her as they would to anyone else. These moments were small, but they mattered. The young woman continued to visit from time to time. Their conversations did not happen every day, and they did not need to. When they did speak, there was no tension, no imbalance. Just two people meeting as they were. One afternoon, the young woman brought a notebook. She said she had started writing, not stories for attention, but thoughts she wanted to understand. She asked if the Apache woman minded listening to one of them. The Apache woman agreed. The words were simple, honest, about learning to slow down, about realizing that speaking without thinking could create distance instead of closeness, about understanding that curiosity without respect could become harm. When the young woman finished, she looked nervous. The Apache woman smiled gently and said the writing was strong because it came from reflection, not performance. The relief on the young woman's face was clear. In that moment, the Apache woman saw how far they had both come. As time passed, she found herself speaking more in small ways. She corrected misunderstandings when they appeared, calmly and clearly. She shared parts of her culture when people asked with genuine interest. She also learned when not to explain, when silence was still the right choice. The difference now was that silence belonged to her. It was no longer something forced upon her by fear or exhaustion. One evening she was invited to a small gathering near the edge of town. Normally she would have declined, but this time she went. People shared food, stories, laughter. Nothing dramatic happened. No big speeches, no sudden changes, just shared space. She noticed that no one tried to label her or question her presence. She was simply there. Later that night, walking home under a sky full of stars, she felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer hiding from herself. She thought about the years she had spent believing that being unseen was safer. She understood now that safety without connection was its own kind of loss. Her elders had taught her that life moved in circles, not straight lines. That lessons often returned in new forms until they were learned. The question that once unsettled her had come back as understanding, growth, and connection. She had not changed who she was. She had reclaimed it. One morning she received a letter from a distant relative. It spoke of family gatherings, of shared memories, of hope for renewed connection. In the past, she might have set the letter aside, unsure. This time, she wrote back. Her words were careful but open. She did not promise anything she could not give, but she allowed the possibility of reconnection. As the seasons shifted, the land around her changed color. Heat gave way to cooler days. The wind carried different scents. She felt aligned with these changes rather than resistant to them. She knew that misunderstandings would never fully disappear from the world. People would still speak carelessly at times. Assumptions would still exist. But she also knew that understanding could grow wherever someone chose to listen and respond with honesty. The lonely feeling that had once followed her like a shadow no longer defined her. She still valued solitude, but it was no longer the same as isolation. One evening, as she sat outside watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon, she reflected on how much could change from a single moment. Not because the moment was dramatic, but because she chose to face it instead of turning away. She smiled softly to herself. Her life was not a story of conflict or resolution alone. It was a story of awareness, of learning when to speak and when to listen, of understanding that dignity and openness could exist together. As the first stars appeared, she felt steady, grounded, complete in a way she had not felt before. The world around her remained imperfect, But she was no longer waiting to be understood. She was living fully and quietly on her own terms.